Well, folks, thanks for joining in again today. And we're kind of responding to requests related to a possible weekend show. And this is Saturday. As you know, we try and do this Monday to Friday to give you insights on the main stories at home and abroad and in the world of culture. And Monday to Friday's been good. We're getting good responses. Appreciate the growing numbers of people wanting to save time in their own personal lives by maybe looking at getting the summaries like this. And we're going to follow this up. We're going to try it out. And so on Saturdays when you tune in, you'll get the daily news, some of it, but you're also going to get a bit of a reflection on what's going on in the past week and what are some of the things moving and affecting how people think about the big topics. So let's jump right into it. In Canada, we're seeing now the sort of the closeout week following the release of the budget, the federal budget in Canada, which was way overdue. The federal Liberals wanting to postpone that as long as possible. And you've been watching and seeing all the numbers, the huge deficits that are growing, and that's going to mean just in the need for increased taxes and not quite the amount of reductions that we'd like to see. We've dealt with all that earlier in the week, so feel free to check back on any of those. The big overriding issue would be what has it done in the polls for the Liberals generally? And so at the end of the week, we see, as in most budget times in any government, you usually hope for a pretty good bump in the polls because you're announcing all kinds of new spending and things to get people excited. So the week ends up with the Liberals looking like across the country, they got about a 4% bump upwards in the poll. Not huge, but they've also had some people leaving and defecting from the Conservative Party, some members of Parliament. All of that has resulted in somewhat of an upward bump. Interesting to see where in the country the biggest increase is and how much the gap is now between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. The largest gap right now it consistently seems to be in Quebec, where the Liberals enjoy about a 20% lead over the Conservatives. This is a bit of a concern to the rest of Canada, certainly in Western Canada, where they always get nervous that the federal Liberal government will usually develop policies that are very positive and enjoyed by the people in Quebec and also in Ontario. That's where the larger voter concentrations are. So some concerns there about disparity and about the fact that the federal Liberals have not been able to, as we would say, bring the country together. You can reflect on that. In Toronto itself, interesting that the Liberals are at about 60%. As you start to move out of the city of Toronto itself into what's called the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, that support starts to drop down to about 53%, still near Toronto. And what causes these, if you look along, it's sort of a phenomenon among big cities that the voters tend to lean to the left, sometimes in extreme ways like New York City and other places, but we usually have a left-leaning approach. There are a number of factors there. Of course, concentration of media in the big cities, despite the fact that people can tap into media from anywhere around the world. But that concentration of media, the concentration of jobs that tend to be more higher percentage on the administrative bureaucratic side. You have the headquarters of major organizations there, non-government organizations and others. There's a variety of factors that lead into big cities traditionally leaning somewhat left. And that's certainly what you see in the Toronto area, and that will drive votes. On polls that were also released at the end of the week, the issue of climate continues to come up. And please check my discussions on this with COP30 coming up. That's the huge environmental conflab that's going to be taking place in 2030 in Brazil. And I'm very concerned about that, and I think all people should be, because they're going to talk about climate justice payments. And I dealt with that on the show yesterday. So in polls recently, media is making quite a stir about the fact that 75.1% of people, this is in Canada, who are asked the question, are you concerned about health related to climate change? And 75% said, hello, yes. So mainstream media is making quite a thing about this, saying, look, the vast majority of people are really concerned about climate change. Remember, 75% of people who are asked the questions, do you think about, are you concerned about health risks related to change of climate? I would have thought that it'd be 99%. If people said to me, someone says to me, do you concern about health risks? Do you think about it? And the way that question was asked was, are you very concerned or even somewhat concerned? So even people who are sort of somewhat thinking, yeah, probably. I'm surprised it's 75%. I thought it would be around 98, 99%. Now compare that with another poll at the end of the week relative to the budget. 14%, only 14% of people across the country are concerned about the deficit, which for fiscal conservatives like myself, and having been a Minister of Finance for the province of Alberta, deficits are a huge concern to me, because deficits mean your debt increases. When your debt increases, that means you have to borrow more and more money just to run the show, just to run government. Borrowing costs increase as deficits increase, and that increases inflation, which increases the cost of living, which increases the cost of the goods you buy at the store. So people can point to all kinds of interesting and fancy and convoluted reasons for the increase in products and consumer products generally, and there's a lot of good reasons there, but the single biggest factor in terms of consumer price index increases are deficits leading to higher debts, leading to higher borrowing costs, leading to higher inflation, and only 14% of people really seem to be focused on that or concerned about that. Again, mainstream media, being culturally Marxist and leaning to the left, does not like to do a huge impact on the effect of deficits. Most of them don't understand it because they've gone to universities, which in terms of economics, take what's called a Keynesian view after John Maynard Keynes, who talked about not to overly worry about going into heavy borrowing, especially to get through hard times. So the deficit is increasing, and the concern about the deficit does not seem to be increasing at the same time. In Canada and in the US, there's a similar struggle going along within each of their respective borders related to the role of the courts. What is the proper role of the courts in our everyday life? And of course, in what we call Western democracies, courts are quite rightly in place as one means of how a society runs itself. They are given certain constitutional powers to reflect on what the main focus is, and that's the Parliament or the Congress, the place where the elected people meet. And the courts are there to be a safeguard against any time that the elected people would come up against or come up with a law that is deemed to be unconstitutional. That's not according to the Constitution. The courts are there. It's called division of powers. It's to try and provide some balance. And the meaning that is attributed to certain political positions is very important when it comes to the courts. And it's important that judges recognize their role is to reflect on the law that's being drawn up by the elected people, and is it constitutional or not? It is not the role of courts, was never intended to be the role of courts to actually make law. That is not their job, but increasingly courts are very active, very invasive in that way, taking on more of a so-called social justice role, and it's really putting an imbalance into how the democratic process could work. The courts should be a check to see if a law or a decision of Parliament is in line with the Constitution. So two things are emerging here just over this last week or so. In Canada, the Supreme Court has come up with a ruling relative to criminal justice. And in this case, some time ago, a ruling was put in place on a number of laws that were seen, a number of offenses that were seen as especially egregious, and anything related to children And abuse of children, pornography, sexually related abuse, obviously is top of mind concern for the vast majority of citizens. And so a very weak attempt was put in place to try and put a mandatory minimum sentence in place for people who were convicted, beyond a shadow of doubt, in terms of being involved with child pornography, child exploitation in terms of sexual and pornographic issues. And it was a 1 year, minimum 1 year. This is for serious breakthroughs, serious egregious offenses in this regard when it comes to child sexual exploitation. And many people said at the time, wow, just 1 year? Most of us, especially those of us who are parents or dads, moms, take a much more strident view about that somebody who is deliberately and long-term and seriously involved in exploitation of children for sexual purposes should have to face more than at least a minimum of 1 year. And recently the Supreme Court in Canada overthrew even that, saying that's too mean, that's too tough on child pornographers. So there's a clear case there where the court has intervened or interceded in a way that many of us say was not their right to do. It is up to the legislatures to determine in terms of what sentencing should look like, and the courts determining if that's constitutional or not. It's caused a bit of an uproar in Canada. So we see something similar in the States, but on a totally different issue. And here, whether people totally understand or not, this is a fairly complex situation that arises in the United States with the so-called shutting down of a government. And that results when one of the parties in the U.S. Congress decides that they don't want to see certain cuts take place. They don't want to see certain changes in the budget. And so they stop the ability of government to continue to fund government programs while these things are being debated. Because what governments usually do in the U.S., they've got a law that says you can only run up a certain percentage of deficit. And to keep going, you have to pass what's called a continuing resolution, a CR. And that basically says, look, you can keep on spending and keep funding government while you debate these things. And the Democratic Party is saying, no, they're not going to allow a continuing resolution, so government grinds to a halt. We can get into a fuller discussion on that some other time. Part of what the Democrats are saying, the reason they're stopping government and the funding of government is because the administration, the White House, Donald Trump, is stopping the flow of funding to what's called the SNAP program. That's a nutrition program, supplementary nutrition program. It's where they get the letters that goes to those deemed to be in poverty. And so a couple of things to clear up. First of all, the Trump administration has put a hold on about a third of that funding. 65% of that funding is still going to families that are registered as below the poverty line. And they're saying we're going to debate the rest of this. We're going to look at why these payments are so increasing so rapidly and seemingly to have no stop. So the courts have intervened and said, no, you can't do that. This is a federal judge said you can't do it. You've got to keep the full SNAP program going. The Trump administration says, look, we're keeping it going, 65%, but no, we can't keep doing this at 100% rate. And it was a judge then who came out and ordered and said, he actually made a determination on the percentage of money that a government must put into a social program. This is completely outside of the guardrails of what courts can be doing. They're actually the judges, and the judge in this case is taking on the role of an elected person in terms of determining what a social program should look like. This is completely offside. Most media don't even focus on this, but it's just being seen as an outrageous ruling. And quite rightly, the Supreme Court has overturned that. They're not saying that the rate or the percentage of which poor families are getting the program is correct or not. They're saying that's not for us to decide. It's the It's the elected people who make those kind of decisions, and courts should not be involved in that. So we'll see what kind of ramifications that may have, but it just shows in both cases, in both countries, different issues, different concerns, but the big issue there is activist courts, so-called activist courts, taking a very active role in what should be decisions that are being made by elected people. If people in Canada think that this is going to change and that judges will sort of back off of this, there's no indication there's going to be a backing off of it, because since 2015, when Justin Trudeau was elected as Prime Minister, since then up until now, when you look at the appointments made by Prime Minister Carney, over 600 judges have been appointed. 600 left-leaning Liberal judges appointed and making rulings that in many cases are not constitutional. Don't look for that to change anytime soon, but if as a citizen you are concerned about judges making overreaching rulings, especially in these areas, egregious areas like child exploitation and child pornography, then don't keep voting Liberal, because that will mean you're going to continue to get Liberal judges on the bench, something you just may want to think about. On the poverty front and the poverty wars and poverty discussions, when we look at the world of culture and entertainment, I think all of our viewers and listeners will be familiar with Whoopi Goldberg and her co-hosting role on the show called The View, which has many millions of viewers. She's actually run into a bit of trouble here with the producers, the executives at ABC, because of comments she's been making. She's been saying that she is not able to afford, she cannot afford to retire. Times are so tough on her, she can't afford to retire. And that's created a lot of backlash, even among the regular viewers at The View, which tend to be predominantly women. Whoopi Goldberg makes about $8 million a year US for being on that show every day. That's a nice little sum to be on that show. That would translate easily into over $10 million a year Canadian. And her net worth is supposed to be, or is evaluated at somewhere between $40 and $60 million. Listen, I have no issue with people in the private sector in terms of what they're making in salary, no issue with that at all. And no issue with the fact that somebody can accumulate a sizable amount of money and decide what they want to do with it. So good for her being able to do that, but being able to also try and make the claim and get sympathy because you can't afford to retire. Let's see, we're going to see now how far this goes in terms of what are the producers at ABC, the executives, saying about that. Whoopi may have gone too far. Keep in mind her name, actually, she herself talks about in her book, her name, Whoopi, comes from what she would occasionally be involved with her stand-up comedy years ago, which is in fact passing gas on stage while she was performing, and hence the name Whoopi coming from whoopee cushion. Her last name, Goldberg, that's not her last name. Her mom suggested that she change her name. This is at a young age, going into the entertainment industry. Her mom said, give yourself a Jewish-sounding last name, and it might also help in terms of your career. So we're going to see if either of those factors are going to result, or if Whoopi has maybe passed a little too much gas on this particular issue of poverty. Interesting going on in culture moves. Many of you, I think, will be familiar with the restaurant chain known as Hooters. Now, we can all say we've never been there. And actually, I'm not pretending to be some kind of purist here, but I don't think I ever have been. I'll check with my wife to see if we've been to Hooters. But as some of you may know, they went into bankruptcy. Hooters went into bankruptcy earlier this year. And part of the reason for that, the declining attendance to their restaurants, is the Gen Z or Gen Z and the Gen Alpha group. So this would be basically anybody from early teens up into the mid 30s are not showing up in the same numbers that maybe they did 10 years ago. And there's less of a demand from those particular groups in particular for restaurants that are offering, let's say, highly sexualized environment. And that's caused a real problem in terms of attendance. They've gone into bankruptcy. So the original owners of Hooters, which began their first operation in Florida, have taken on new partners to get out of bankruptcy, and it's Hooters going to be taking on a new look. The dress, the clothes that especially the female servers will be wearing, the skirts or the shorts are getting longer, going to be longer, and they are no longer going to be having their famous weekly bikini nights, which would be obvious what would be showing on bikini nights. They're going to a little more, let's say, traditional or conservative clothing attire. And on the food side of things, they are moving from frozen wings, for instance, to advertising that they have fresh wings. So they're making some moves on the wings. Sounds like they're also making some moves on the thighs, and we'll see where that's going to go. On a very serious note in terms of women, we're talking about women today, and one of the most, I think should be one of the most famous names today, it happens to be a woman, and maybe a name a lot of people haven't heard of, and this woman's name is Leah Sharibu. Leah Sharibu. Leah Sharibu is a Nigerian Christian woman, and we've been seeing, thankfully, finally, a little bit more in the media about the devastating attacks on Christianity in general and Christians specifically in Nigeria. It's also happening in Sudan. We've reported on that. But it's the horrific nature of the Islamist group, Boko Haram. And you see mainstream media, they'll often say Boko Haram being the Islamist name of this particular terrorist group, but they don't like to tag the fact that they are Islamist. They are an Islamist group, and the raids that they do in the Christian communities throughout Nigeria, attacking towns and literally burning down homes, killing and raping and torturing and capturing. Now, Leah Sharibu was one of 109 girls. This happened about 8 years ago in the town of Dapchi in Nigeria that were captured, kept for a number of years. Most of those girls have been released. And thankfully for that, unlike many of the other girls all around the country over the years that have been kidnapped, taken hostage, have not yet been released. So the girls, there's over 100 of them who have been released. They talked in detail about horrific torture at the hands of this Islamist group. They talk about nonstop rape, talk about nonstop slavery. And this one group that was the 109 girls that were taken hostage were released. And among those over 100 girls that were released, they were asked the question, what about Leah? Why was she not released? And they said, well, despite the rape, the slavery, the torture, the fact that she has had at least 2 children in captivity, she refuses to renounce the name of Christ. This is, to me, it's staggering. I don't know, where she would get the fortitude and the strength to do this, but it's a horrific situation. So she's not being released because she is refusing to renounce Christianity. I think, boy, the time, even in my own life, where you want to back away from a Christian topic, or even from boldly declaring your faith, just for fear maybe of losing an interview, or maybe not getting a promotion at work. And here is Leah, not the only one, but here's Leah Sharibu taking this type of an approach to her faith. Let's keep her in mind. And also, it's President Donald Trump who is the only world leader who's really getting fired up about the attacks on Christianity in Nigeria, rape and torture and enslavement. Slavery should be an issue of particular interest and sensitivity to people in Canada and the US. And the assault on women and young girls, again, as we asked the question yesterday with the rapes of women done by Hamas, where are the feminists? Where are the feminists? Is it just because the groups that are doing this horrific stuff in Nigeria are Islamist? Is there some kind of a rule that I'm not aware of that you're not allowed to criticize? You can criticize anybody else in these areas, but not Islamists. It's something to be looked at. By the way, I'm not for a second saying all Muslim people are in favor of this, but it's a significant part of the population of what we call Islam. And these Islamists, which would be the extremists, they exist around the world by the tens of millions, and so little criticism from mainstream media. So we're keeping, if you are a person of prayer and a person of faith, keep Leah Sharibu in mind. And even if you're not a person of faith, keep her in mind, would you please? Also hoping to see some resolution there as Trump, thankfully, is turning up the heat and maybe invoking some special powers to do something about this. Well, on the cultural front, you may be interested to know that something interesting happening in Canada, in Vancouver, related to J.K. Rowling, of course, the author of the most successful in history series on the Harry Potter series. And as a promotion for Harry Potter and all upcoming movies, etc., around the world, these theme parks developed. They're usually temporary, maybe at Christmas time, and it's a business venture for sure, using that title name and the copyright to it. And in Vancouver, one of these theme parks, it's kind of a temporary thing. It's done in the Christmas season and the holiday season, and it's a Harry Potter themed park that you go through at night. There's all kinds of fantastic light shows and electronics, and these shows that they have on the Harry Potter theme parks around the world, they're pretty amazing. Well, not long ago, the Vancouver Park Board had in its discussions, and it was raised by some of their officials, these are elected people, actually were so upset that there would even be an application for a theme park like this. They wanted to rule it illegal. They said that J.K. Rowling is hateful and an awful person. J.K. Rowling, just in case you're not aware of it, in an interview some time ago, has maintained that she believes genders are male and female, and that she also believes certainly adults certainly have the right to alter their gender either chemically through pharmaceuticals or by surgery. They certainly have that right, but children's rights should be protected. And she said her personal position is how you are biologically born, what the gender with which you were born, not assigned, but with which you were born, that's actually your gender. And you can change whatever you like about it, but that's your gender, and that's what she says. And of course, she has been just for a number of years now attacked, and just people wanting to have her completely banned from society, and all kinds of outrageous death threats and everything else. So this came up at the Vancouver Park Board, officials saying this is terrible. Her work should not be allowed here. Anyway, it did go ahead. Thankfully, there must have been some enough common sense people on that board to say, no, if this application for a park, it meets all the applications for a commercial endeavor, and it's gone ahead, and it's just opened, and it is the most successful show ever in Vancouver's Stanley Park. Most successful of all time. So, folks, maybe it's good just to take a step back and look at these things in a calm way and just enjoy some of the wondrous creative works that people are involved in. Think about that. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you on Monday.